This is the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, sharing insights into the power of people-centric leading.
This is Jim, and today we welcome to our tribe an international speaker, a trainer, and an author who has helped empower people to be more purposeful, productive, and prosperous. He's the host of the Freedom Mindset Radio podcast, is the founder of the Freedom Media Network, and he's authored the Amazon bestseller book, 5 Pillars of the Freedom Lifestyle. He is Curt Mercadante. The Iron Sharpens Iron movement is brought to you by N2 Growth, a leader in executive search, leadership development, and talent management. We find and develop the world's best leaders. Learn more about our practice by visiting us at n2growth.com or click on the link in the show notes of this podcast. Well, Curt, welcome to the tribe. It's a pleasure to have you here with us today.
James, it's an honor, pleasure. So happy to share this time with you during this interesting times, right? I think it was Confucius that said, "May we live in interesting times," and don't know if he predicted this, but here we are.
Here we are. Yeah, and for everybody's awareness, we are recording this still at the height of the COVID-19 virus outbreak, the global pandemic, and right now, we're still pre-apex of the wave here in the United States. So definitely some interesting times. We'll probably end up referring to it for sure. So, Curt, one thing about the Iron Sharpens Iron movement, and, we call them a tribe of listeners, it's normally focused on, leadership traits, how to be a good follower, how to be a mentor. But one of the things that has always interested me about you, one of the things you're well known that, in order to lead successfully, you first got to understand yourself. That's where it all starts. And you're quite the guy that calls out the BS on people who don't accept that as a matter of fact. And I'd love to know kind of some of your initial thoughts when you're like, you got to look yourself in the mirror.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I'm a big believer in when I do workshops with teams and corporations, and I'll go in and I'll show a slide that says there's no I in blank. And of course, everyone says team. And I said, right, I'm a motivational speaker. I'm a leadership, I'm a developer, and I'm supposed to say that, right? And they said, yeah. And I said, I don't believe in this at all. And they said, what? And I refer back to I grew up in Chicago. I came of age, in the 90s. I was going from high school into college in the 90s when the Bulls won their 6 championships. I lived and died with those championships, right?
Michael Jordan.
Yeah, and I remember. So Michael, at his Hall of Fame acceptance ceremony, told a story. So of course Phil Jackson was there was the coach, but they also had the coach who was the architect of the triangle offense. His name was Tex Winter, and he was a tactician, and he was kind of a crotchety guy. And there was a game where the rest of the team wasn't performing up to snuff, and Michael took over the game and just started taking a ton of shots. And at halftime, as Michael tells the story, they're walking off the court, and Tex says, Michael, there's no I in team. And he looked at Tex and said, no, but there is in the word win. And that's not to say that you're selfish, because self-care, I have another slide where I say self-care is self-blank. And a lot of people say selfish, like reflexively. And that's what we're taught, right? When in reality, a team is made up. I'm a Gallup certified strengths trainer. And what they found over the years is that the most successful people aren't well-rounded necessarily. There's nothing wrong with being well-rounded. The most successful teams are well-rounded because they're made up of people who are very sharp in their areas, in their strengths. And if we don't each take personal responsibility for being as close to 100% as we are, that's not a victimless crime, because then we're not 100% for the people we love. We're not 100% for our family, for our spouses, for our partners, whoever. We're not 100% for our communities. We're not 100% for our job. And so a lot of times we think that, lack of self-care, lack of personal responsibility, especially in our current society, and we see this going on right now as we talk about this, the COVID-19, that everyone wants to worry about someone else, and they're snitching on their neighbors now. Now some cities have hotlines for people to snitch. And I ask, how many of those people who are snitching on their neighbors and busybodies worrying about people going to the park are sitting at home, pumping their bodies full of sugar, having a cigarette, not take caring of themselves. Because if you're really concerned about health and you're really concerned about all of that, and you're concerned about not overcrowding the hospitals, which, by the way, aren't just being overcrowded supposedly in Italy and New York with people with COVID-19, but with people who are having heart attacks, strokes, and the like, then you truly got to take personal responsibility. But it's easier to look at someone else and, let he, without fault cast the first stone. It's a timeless principle.
So what's your belief in this? Is it more natural to be lazy and not go 100%? Or is it primal that you would be 100%, but it's just got dulled down over time just through laziness and TV and sugar and social media and everything else? What do you think we're actually primed to do?
Yeah. So you mentioned the word primal. I'm actually also a primal health coach, right? And that involves eating low carb, not stuffing yourself with sugar, eating lots of healthy proteins, healthy fats, those types of things, and exercising like people used to exercise naturally. They didn't do it as exercise; they did it for survival. It wasn't chronic cardio, running an hour of a day and wearing your body down and messing with your natural human growth hormone. It's short sprints. It's long, slow kind of walking, but not that like wears you down. It's lifting heavy things, those types of things, getting plenty of sleep, the natural rhythms of sleep and wake and all that, right? I think all of that is primal. And so, yes, I think we are primed for survival, right? We were in the caves. There's no way we should have survived. But if, we put freedom and thriving over security. So we exited the caves and we used what? Our critical thinking minds and the creative flow to survive against beasts and the environment and all that. So I think the human body and the human mind, yes, is originally conditioned for that. However, the evolutionary programming of the last 200 years of comfort, I think, has taken away the iron that sharpens our iron. And now there's a great professor, Frank Fioretti. He's in the UK. Recently, I saw a piece that specifically we're looking about COVID-19 and what's happening, and he surmises that we've come to really judge people by their vulnerabilities rather than their resilience. And he compares it to how we handled past epidemics, the Hong Kong flu, the Spanish flu epidemic, even handling World War II. Right? We went into World War II. We lost 405,000 Americans. That's a lot of Americans, because I see people right now without context saying, hey, with COVID-19, we don't want to lose 100,000 people. Well, of course you don't want to lose 100,000 people.
Of course.
But if you throw things out without context, World War II, we lost 405,000 people. Now, a lot of people don't realize at the time, if I went out and said, hey, was that worth it to remove Hitler? People, oh, of course, I'm anti-Hitler. That's the easiest thing to be, right, is anti-Hitler. At the time, though, we didn't get involved for a long time. And if we had social media every day saying we predict we're going to lose 400,000 people, I don't know that we would have ever gone to war. And this isn't a value judgment about that, but Spanish flu, we dealt with it by, I've read a lot of things. The president at the time didn't even address the country about it. Granted, they didn't have TV, they didn't have social media, they didn't have press briefings. But we dealt with the Spanish flu. I think 300,000 Americans died, while, by the way, winning World War I. And here we can't even have a restaurant open right now. And I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying that even by raising this notion of maybe we should look at the trade-offs here. I don't want to lose anyone. I don't want anyone to die. Just like I don't want the 600,000 people every year who die of heart disease to die. But let's look at history, let's look at context, and let's focus on our resilience to get past things rather than even raising that notion now. It's almost like positivity and talking about the economy is suddenly immediately a political act or immediately brands you as someone who wants to kill seniors. And it's like, that's not critical thinking. That's not iron sharpening iron.
That's right. No, that's exactly correct. So how do you start? Let's just kind of stay centered on still looking yourself in the mirror.
Yeah.
On how do you stay motivated in with all of these outside sources that are coming, right? You got the TV on, you got the radio, you got the kids home from school, you may not be in a job. All these negative things are around you, right? Negative things. But yet, Curt, you're saying show up at 100%. Show up at 100%. It's what you should do. How do you do that? And what does right look like? How do you know that's the right thing? Is it just you feel it, right? I mean, what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny that 2 days ago, I'm active on Twitter, right? But I'm active on Twitter only as much as I need to be. I don't sit there and I consume it. I use lists so I don't have to watch the craziness. And a leadership guru, I won't say his name, listed 2 days ago. They announced another 30 days of self-isolation. They predict 100 and 200,000 people dying, and there were a couple other bad news things. This supposed leadership guru shares the lists of bad things and says, well, does anyone have anything positive? And I responded, I said, well, I ignore all those things and I focus on my outcomes. And he said, I can't remember his exact thing, but I can't ignore it. I need to pay attention so I know how to deal with them. And I think here's the deal. Obsession isn't the same as knowing what you need to know and moving on. I challenge people, and this, by the way, is the same whether we're in a virus, a pandemic, a war, whatever it is, unless it's coming to your doorstep, unless you're a frontline worker, unless you're an epidemiologist, it's not your duty to obsess about every death, every case, everything. And because you have a duty to your clients, your job, yourself, your family. And last week, I found myself seeping into the news a little bit. And what happened? I was negative. Then I'm not at 100%. Yesterday, I woke up. It was my daughter's 14th birthday.
Awesome.
I woke up, it was a quarantine birthday. We did the best we could. Her friends came over in separate cars and stood 10 feet apart throughout the lawn and sang happy birthday. She had a wonderful birthday. We made the best of it. I focused on my sales calls. By the time it was like 5:00, I hadn't watched the news. And you know what? I survived. It's not like a tornado or a hurricane that's coming to us, but even during a hurricane, I'm from Chicago. I live in Charleston, South Carolina. Now, this has been new for me, and we've had a hurricane either hit or near hit every year for the past, I think, 5 years. And if you sit there for this feels like a hurricane, right? Because we're not at that bump yet as we record this. But you're like, it's coming, it's coming. It's like that with a hurricane. And they show the Bahamas getting hit. Then they show Miami getting hit. And they show this thing coming up. And everyone's like, you're going to die. You're going to be. And people from around the world are calling. And finally, I did that the first 2 years. And then I realized this is doing me no good at all. And when I say that, people get so fundamentally upset as if watching the news is the same as providing aid to someone in the Bahamas, or as if watching the news is the same as going out and providing comfort to a family in Italy whose family has died. It's not. We can't substitute likes and shares and views for real empathy and action. And so I tell people it's age old. Marcus Aurelius and Epictetus talked about this thousands of years ago. It's a Stoic philosophy. Guard your mind, focus on what you can focus on, and also realize that the events in front of you and how you respond to them is mostly based on your perception of that event. And if you realize every day I find myself slipping into, is this really happening? Oh my gosh, my kids have to celebrate their birthdays with this. I snap myself out of it and say, well, that's happening. But right now we're healthy, we're happy. And me getting upset about it is just my perception of it. It's not actually, I'm not in a hospital bed suffering from the virus. And so it is actually is important. And it's, I think it's very telling that attitude and that mindset, and I'm not the only one to have it, is somehow controversial today.
Well, it's interesting that, so as you were talking, I was just thinking both of these things, whether you're focusing on your outcomes, which I want to talk a little more about, or whether you're victimized by perception, that's all living between those two ears, right in your head, both of those things. And so it's almost a matter of controlling your brain, right? You get to choose. I'm a big victim-victor kind of person, right? You get to
Yeah.
choose same scenario. You can either be a victim of it or victorious in it. And so you talk about focusing on those outcomes. That's kind of your locus of control. Isn't it sad? I'd love to have your opinion on this, but like these people that are judging you, like if you're like, there's nothing I can do for the hurricane coming, like I'm going to live my life and not be paralyzed for it. And then people judge you about it. It's not like you're being irresponsible and not boarding up your house or preparing your family with extra food or something like that, but you're just not paralyzed by it. Talk to me about in daily life about when you focus on outcomes. What are some of these tangible things you talk to people about the things they can truly control?
Yeah, yeah. The key first is I have 5 pillars that I go through, but one of the key pillars is vision, and having that clear vision for your life. And a lot of people try to move toward their vision, and it's like throwing stuff against the wall, seeing what sticks, or bouncing around like a pinball from objective to objective. Like, I'll figure out where to go. And listen, when you're young, I think we need to allow more of that when you're young, right? To kind of figure that out when in your teens, and it's not all just about command and control college, and that's the key to happiness, right? Because I work with a lot of people who are in their 40s who are condemned to that. But at a certain point, you realize, yeah, I'm bouncing around, but where does it all lead? What's that vision? So that vision is important because you clearly identify it. And by the way, if you're in the midst of crisis and feel compelled to change your vision, it wasn't the right vision. And so you reverse engineer that vision. It's just like in the olden days, right? Before GPS and Google Maps, you'd have to take a paper map. You'd have to put it down. You'd put a dot on the map or a pin, like where you wanted to go. And
That's
then you
right.
drew on the map or whatever, you reverse engineered it. That's what we have to do with our lives. It starts with that and then reverse engineering it so that you can every year, every month, every week, every day, those 3 outcomes. And by the way, if a crisis happens, yeah, you may have to change up some of the outcomes, right? I mean, if you're doing an
Sure.
in-person event or your whole career is public speaking at public events, your vision doesn't change, but some of the outcomes you have for the year, okay, I got to shift and do some more sales now, and I have to change some of those outcomes. But in the meantime, every day it starts with me waking up hours before. We have 4 kids, waking up before them and sitting in stillness and quietness, not checking my email, not worrying about my to-do list, not worrying about anything else, and focusing on just being centered. And that really calms me for the day. And then I do affirmations, which starts at I am energy, I am love, I'm gratitude, I'm joy, I'm patience, and I'm detached. And that energy piece, really, I focus on that so much because we're energy turned into matter. I mean, that's basic science, right? It's not magic, it's
You
not
bet.
mystical. And finding that energy within to realize that is my tool. That energy is my weapon in the force of my creative mind and my ability to help others, whether it's starring on a podcast or it's making a sales call, because sales is about helping other people. And that charges me up for the day. And I don't enter every day wondering, well, what the heck should I do today? Well, I've reverse engineered my vision, so I know my outcomes for the day. I focus like heck on them. I don't spend my time spinning out of control on Twitter. I don't, like I used to when I had my PR and ad agency, have cable news on in the background. I go into my cocoon and I focus on what I need to do, because if I don't, there's no benefit from it. And if I also, in this crisis, and it's not just this crisis, this is the 3rd time in my career, and I'm sure your career, 9/11, the meltdown of 2007, 2008, where there's been a kind of a global scary crisis.
Yeah.
And in those first 2 crises, 9/11, I was too young to really care, which has its benefits, right? Because you have that energy and you're indestructible when you're young, which is great. 2007, 2008, for 2 years, I was in a full panic that everything was going to go belly up. Now I stay centered in my outcomes and in my process, and that keeps me moving forward. But I talk to a lot of people, some of them clients, who are in a full out panic, saying, I'm in a panic, therefore everything's in a panic. No one's buying, and that's it. And I'm not going to make sales calls. It's like, wait,
Oh, geez.
whoa, how do you know? And so I get them start having conversations with people. If you look at, for instance, sales as something other than helping and having conversations, then yeah, by all means, stop doing it, crisis or not. um,
Right.
but right now, just reach out to talk to people. And all week. I've probably made at this point 60 sales calls. I mean, I call them sales calls, 60 calls. And I would say 50 of them were completely cold. Like people who linked with me on LinkedIn, I call them up and they're like, "What? What?" I've had some incredible conversations. Some may not lead to anything, some may lead to something, some may lead to something a year or two from now, but people are hungry for conversations and value. Um,
Yeah.
and
The connection.
yeah. And if you use your process of making those, okay, I have my list. I'm going to call them, and then I'm going to break for lunch, and you schedule. I'm going to check the news between 5 and 5:15 today, and then I'm turning it off, and then I'm going to go with my family or whatever. I'm going to go for a walk or a run. You compartmentalize it, focus on your outcomes, and they can make you bulletproof.
I love that. And for context, in this podcast today is Wednesday morning. So these 60 calls that you've made were just in the time frame of a Monday and a Tuesday so far. So
Exactly.
that's Johnny Hustle for sure. Like, so when you talk about vision, that North, I love to say, the North Star. What's your North Star? How are you going towards it and stuff? Do you think it's important? What do you recommend to people, like when they say, okay, this is my vision, whatever it is, this is my vision. Do they write it down? Do they put it on a sticky and it sits on their computer so that they see it? Do they create? I have a great friend of mine. His name's Jim Kerr. He's a cultural expert, and he talks about a vision story, the
Mm-hmm.
importance of turning that into a story, your vision into a story, so you can see it in your own head. How do you talk to folks about just really creating the vision and the practicality of it, I guess, of following that North Star?
Yeah, so I'm a Gallup strengths trainer, and so I always try to avoid um, suggesting or mandating. Suggesting is a bad word. I'll always suggest, but kind of mandating or pushing someone in a direction of a specific tool or a specific because there's people who are more creative and visual, and for them it's like, yeah, draw it, make a kind of vision board type piece and use your artistic talent. I like seeing words on a page. There are other people who maybe like it audio, and so whatever you have to do to really make it get in front of you and use that system. That's why the first of my 5 pillars is actually superpowers. So it starts with that strengths finder assessment, and we dig in deep to find out what moves you. Are you more of a strategic thinker, more of an influencer, more of an activator or an executor? Are you analytical? Are you deliberative? Or are you an activator? And whatever moves you is what is going to, I urge you to unleash to help you get there. Because you mentioned the word motivation, not in this question, but the last question. Motivation and willpower are why the gyms are busy in January, in a non-pandemic, right? Why the gyms are busy
Yes,
in January.
yes.
But the people who follow a process and a system are the ones who are still there in October, because motivation and willpower is using your conscious mind to say, I'm going to do it, I'm going to go, and I'm going to get it done, and I'm going to get it done. Well, your subconscious mind will kick your conscious mind's butt every
Every
day of the
time.
week because it represents 95% of your actions in your day and your mind. So you got to get in and reprogram that subconscious in order to allow that system to work. And then it's like, it just flows. You get in that state of flow, and that's a better way to get things done.
So you mentioned, just for some of us that aren't familiar with strength finders, can you give just a 30-second essence of really what strength finders calls out in people and kind of the theory behind a strength finder, assessment onto a person? That
Yeah.
Jim Collins, good to great, and putting people in the bus on the right seats at the right time, all those kind of things. Can you just kind of tell us about strength finders itself, on how it makes sense to then find what your niche is, on how you would describe the vision, say?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, James, did you ever play baseball?
I was a football guy.
Okay.
I was a football guy, but obviously very familiar with baseball. I'm a sports guy.
Are you right-handed or left-handed?
I'm a lefty. Southpaw.
Okay. You're a lefty, you're a southpaw. So imagine you're a baseball pitcher and you're a southpaw. And at the beginning of the season, your manager comes to you and said, James, we're going to try something different this year. We're going to have you pitch with your right hand. And I ask people, how would that make you feel? And I'll have baseball players always, or softball players in the audience. They say, well, I would suck. It wouldn't be as fun. I would hate it. I'd get kicked off the team or I'd quit. And I said, right. Whether or not you're right-handed or left-handed is a talent with which you were born. Whether you can throw a baseball is a skill. You combine those two, that's an investment. You turn it into a strength. But then you go one step further. You combine it with your knowledge, your skill, your passion, your sense of rah-rah, the teamwork. You come every day and you're like, I'm going to hit the batting cages and I'm going to throw 1,000 pitches a day and I'm going to get it done. Then you turn it into a superpower. And the way that works for all of us is whether we're entrepreneurs or we work for someone else or we're managers, often we force ourselves or the people who work for us to pitch from the non-dominant side of the plate. Right. And we do that because the dominant development mentality in our society is deficit based. What are your weaknesses? Focus on fixing them in schools. Majority of parents, I think Gallup finds that 76% of parents think that kids should focus almost solely on the subjects in which they perform most poorly rather than the best. And I say that's like telling Usain Bolt,
hurtful.
Hey, your 100-meter time, awesome, great. But we're not going to let you practice it anymore because your mile time sucks. So you got to work on your mile time. And people laugh. And it's like, but apply that to listen, yeah, be competent in math. But a poet doesn't need to be an expert in calculus, but we standardize, we do these types of things that push people toward that. So that's the best way I can explain it. And it's not about ignoring your strengths. It's about finding out what comes naturally to you, your patterns of thought, feeling, and behavior, investing in them that turn them into strengths, and amplifying those strengths, but then managing your weaknesses, hiring people around you that represent what you don't do as well. Or if you're an entrepreneur and you don't have time or resources to get that extraneous stuff done, just throw those, don't do activities that are in your weaknesses zone and focus on what you do best.
Absolutely. And so was it deliberate? So you keep referring to, you have kind of like 5 pillars, and you wrote a book, The 5 Pillars of the Freedom Lifestyle. And this first one, superpowers, in which we just talked about, was the use of the word superpowers. Was that deliberate? And how'd you come up with superpowers? Is it just by unleashing everything that you just talked about?
Yeah, superpowers. So I my dad was a superhero, and he was my hero, and he was kind of like a real life Tony Stark. He or actually even more like a Howard Stark, Tony's father, if anyone's familiar with the movies. My dad never served. But he designed technology and fighter jets. He worked on the space program. Awesome. He has a patent. I'm looking at it on my office wall for the switches, electronic switches on the Boeing 777. My brother actually has a story of my dad telling him back in the 70s about designing a shoulder fired missile or something. He did all this cool stuff, right?
That is very cool.
And, he was saving the world. And for a long time, I felt like I wasn't. But I grew up kind of an only child. All my siblings are at a minimum 9 years older than me. And so I had a lot of playtime. And what would I do? I was 6 years old when the first Superman came out. I grew up on that. And so I always had this feeling that I was supposed to do something to save the world, but I always felt like I wasn't doing that. And several years ago, I had a 7-figure PR and ad agency. And it was the second profitable business that I founded. And I had scaled that agency over 13 years. And I was so unfulfilled, anxiety attacks, poor health, cocktail of prescription drugs. I was 50 pounds heavier than I was now. My relationships sucked. I wasn't mentally and physically present with my wife and my kids until one day, it came to a head when my father passed in 2012, but I still didn't make a change. Several years later, I woke up one morning. It was supposed to be vacation week. But my clients, team, all this, hey, send us this email, hop on this call. We know it's vacation, but you got to hop on this call. You're coming up to this meeting next week. I woke up and at peak revenue, I shut it down and said, I'm done.
Oh, wow.
And I hadn't defined my vision yet. And when I really got down to the work of defining my vision, it kept coming back to superpowers. And so my vision is to save the world by helping individuals fight for lives of freedom and fulfillment. And the reason that that's so important to me and why your vision is so important is that for so long, I felt like I wasn't up to snuff because my dad was a math whiz. I'm math illiterate, right? I hate math, right?
I am with you.
I'm a words guy. I'm an English guy. But my dad was building stuff that you'd see in a Marvel movie, right? Someday and I felt I wasn't saving the world. I'm sending out press releases, and that's nothing against anyone who does that. But for me, I felt like I wasn't up to snuff. And I had to come to the realization that we all have our superpowers. We can't all be Hulk, can't be Tony Stark, and Tony Stark can't be Thor. And I use these superpower things because I got 4 kids and we're into it. But it's the same way. You have to realize, stop trying to be someone else and stop telling everyone that you can be whatever you want to be. Because it's actually cruel. You can't. I'm 5'4". I'm not going to be an NBA center. I'm sorry.
Right.
Larry Bird wasn't going to be Michael Jordan, but Larry Bird could be the best Larry Bird that he could be. And by the way, that's good enough to be one of the best basketball players that ever walked the earth. So we got to discover our internal superpowers and save the world in whatever way comes naturally to us.
And that's not hokey. That's the whole thing about this, right? I mean, like, it is a true, if people just listen to your words and follow the conversation, these are things that are achievable. It's not some, razzmatazz kind of thing. It's not, some tagline. It's the realities are but it starts with accountability with each person, right? You got to take that first step to say, I need to do that. You mentioned something earlier too about the first thing you do when you wake up is to center yourself. And so in relation to, like, all right, how do I discover what these, all right, I'm all in, I'm listening to Curt and Jim talk. So, I want a superpower too. I'm all in. How do I do it? Like when you're talking about being centered and you said you sit in complete silence, what does that do for you? And does that truly allow you to, for the first time, actually hear your own voice?
Yeah, it's my own voice. And it's also, I truly believe, and for years, and I know some people don't believe in God and things like that. But for years, I believe that God was this man with a beard somewhere that you go trembling in front of and beg for stuff, right? And I have family members who felt that way and felt betrayed when my father died. Now, my father was 83 and fought cancer for years. I mean, but they thought, you ask God, you beg God, and if he doesn't give for you, prayers don't work. I've come to truly believe that we're born with God within us. And if you want to say that's the universe, you want to look at it as energy, that's fine. I think it's all the same thing. And it's within us. Prosperity isn't something you go out and get. Prosperity is within you. And it's been proven, right? I mean, I already talked about the humans venturing out of the caves. What did we use to defeat the beasts and tame the environment? We used our creative mind. And it starts within our mind. I mean, a hammer didn't just appear. It literally was a thought that turned into something physical. So often those thoughts don't come to us unless we quiet the noise, because those thoughts that are going to move you forward and those ideas are the signal. Sometimes you got to tamp down the noise, or not sometimes. Always we got to tamp down the noise.
Always.
I was always the person who thought I thrived on the noise. And that's where the motivation and willpower came in. It's the what people think Grant Cardone and Gary Vee are saying, but they don't explain well enough, I don't think, in my humble opinion, that it's not just about the hustle and breaking down doors. Let's sit and think. We just watched a great movie, 1917. I don't know if you've
Oh,
seen it.
great movie. I've seen it.
And it's such a wonderful, I haven't served like you have, but it's so wonderful because I use that. I just wrote a piece on it, using that as an example of the power of critical thinking, but also the danger of knowledge blindness in a crisis. Because what really stuck out for me was not only the story of him delivering this message, but remember that captain warns him, make sure there's witnesses when you deliver this message.
Yes.
And when he gets there, it was proven true because Benedict Cumberbatch's character was like, no, I'm moving forward. I'm moving forward. So often it's easy to get enveloped and caught up with the noise. And I don't care what's going to happen. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to go and I'm going to tear down walls. And it's like, wait, let's slow down. Let's find the signal. Let's employ some critical thinking. And by the way, after you do the critical thinking, then you go forward and then you knock the hell out of whatever you're going to do.
That's great.
But often we're in the forest chopping down 100 trees where it's like you step back and you realize, wait, I only had to chop down 2.
It's amazing. I tell people this story sometimes that's directly related to this. When the last thing that I did when I was in the military, I was in this position. It was called the Command Chief Master Sergeant of the Air National Guard. So I was like the senior enlisted person that represented 105,000 airmen across the globe. And I thought I was really important. Right. I was in the Pentagon and I was an important person. And my calendar was literally filled from 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. in 15-minute increments of just all meetings, right? Meeting, because I was an important guy. And so it was so packed that I even had to, no kidding, schedule like bathroom breaks and things like that. And so for years, I walked around thinking all of this noise, all of this busyness proved how important I was. And it also showed people how important it was. And one of the things that I realized was, looking back on it now, I would have been so much of a better person personally and as a leader if I took a lot of that noise away. And if I had the guts to take those 15-minute increments and actually block out an hour, 2 hours of time just to myself, just to think, just to slow down, just to stop the noise. And I just think it's so important. And your ability to actually think is when you're in those quiet times, when you're in those times to self-reflect and all of those things. And it's one of the greatest lessons that I wish I had learned in real time, but at least I look back and reflect on it and go, wow, what a joker I was at the time, thinking I was that important because of all this noise that I was even help creating when it was really to a detriment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. Tuning it out is so key. And that's when things can come to you. And there's a great book called The Creative Curve. It's by Alan. Oh gosh, now I'm gonna come up with the name here in a second. And it's sitting on my desk, and I've known him. I've had him on my podcast. Anyways, it's by Alan Gannett, and he talks about this notion that creativity. He kind of spends the book blowing apart this notion that everyone is just struck by creativity, or that there's just these people who are so much more creative and they just get this inspiration out of nowhere. And he kind of blows that apart. But one of the things he talks about is creativity as a product of investment in yourself, but also creativity as a product of there's a reason creative ideas come to you when you're doing kind of rote things like taking a shower or walking down the street. And it's because you calm you calm the noise so much that those ideas can rise to the surface.
That makes sense.
It's like you calm your and so it's very interesting. I've boxed for a couple of years. I haven't now in like 6 months. But if this is where that programming comes into play. And why it's so important to, in the morning, as part of the meditation and affirmation, reprogram yourself to focus on a vision rather than marinating in the BS of the past. And that is, and I use my affirmations to do that, to realize that, to put out of my mind any lack, any thoughts of lack or limitation, or I can't do this and more. Here's where I'm going to go. And you visualize it like you've already been there. So then you have muscle memory and mind memory. It's like, oh, I've already been there. I know where it is. I'm going to move in that direction. And you know, that programming, if you get into the ring, if you've just practiced and you're like, yeah, I hit the heck out of the bag and I'm so strong and I can pound that bag, right? And then you get into the ring and you haven't fully programmed yourself by practicing in the ring with someone who's coming at you to knock your head off.
Right.
What happens when that bell rings is your cortisol takes over. And that's your fight or flight. And when that takes over, that's your subconscious programming takes over. And when your subconscious programming takes over, if you're not programmed and you haven't programmed yourself to deal not just with hitting a stationary bag, but to have someone deal with someone who's coming at you literally to knock your block off, you can't rely on smarts and your conscious creativity because your fight or flight, your cortisol literally shuts that off. It shuts off that part of the brain because that's the part of the brain that causes you to hesitate. So if you're not programmed in a way that allows you to respond without thinking, then what happens? You see it in the ring with people who do this. You put your hands up and you don't hit back and you just get into the corner and you get your butt kicked. It's that way in life. If you're not programmed to deal with some of these things, to focus on the vision, and if you're programmed to think about all the bad things that happened, when a crisis like this happens, you're one of the people who kind of like, you know, curls in the corner and says, I can't do anything. I'm going to wither up and die.
Yeah, paralyzed in fear.
That's why, absolutely.
So, what are your thoughts on, you know, your own way to articulate resilience? You know, when you talk about this is your moment in time, you know, if there's going to be a fight or flight scenario, and that's in business every day, really, from a resilience point of view, what are some of those things that you think are best for people to focus on, and some of these processes and systems of really training your body to have that resilient mindset, training your mind to have a resilient mindset, your spirit, and all of those kind of things? What are your viewpoints on resiliency?
Yeah, so there's three pieces that I'd like to highlight. One is on that last part that you mentioned, I interviewed Marcus Aurelius Anderson recently, who was training to deploy. He at age 37 got an age waiver. He entered the U.S. Army, was training in the mountains of upstate New York, broke his back, died twice on the operating table, was paralyzed for a year, and came out of it seeing his adversity as a gift. And now he's a mindset coach, author, incredible human being. And we talked about this very thing. And he recommends, because we talked about, I take cold showers in the morning. I do. And he recommends what he calls these things micro adversities, cold showers, breath holds, sprint training, like these types of things to condition yourself for bad things, to condition yourself for stress and pressure each day. And they're small things, but they help condition you so that you have the ability to lower in a period of stress, to lower your heart rate, which calms your mind, which allows you that critical thinking space. The second piece is process, like we mentioned. So Joe Peachy, ranked the #1 sales guru by Global Gurus, right? I had him on my show 2 weeks ago, and we talked about how to center yourself. And he's like, listen, I don't watch the news, Curt. I know what I need to know. If a pandemic is coming down the street, I'll know it. But other than that, I wake up, I have my lead generation process, and I make 150 outbound sales calls a week, if there's a pandemic or no pandemic. And that's what I do. And so he focuses on his process. Whatever that process is for you, get up and do it. You know, I remember when I was a kid, I was a fat kid. And I got in shape, but I felt self-conscious about running in the neighborhood because I thought people would laugh at this chubby kid running. And I remember my mom looked at me and said, what kind of jacket are you wearing? And I said, running jacket. She goes, what's on the chest there? I said, the Nike swoosh. She says, yeah, Nike. What's their tagline? I said, just do it. Right. That's all she had to say. She said, stop talking to me about this and just go do it. So you center yourself in that process and you go and do that. The third part is the Chinese, going back to the Tao Te Ching, have this concept that they've talked about called Wu Wei. It's the concept of unattached action. The sixth affirmation I do every day is I'm detached. And it's this notion that you focus on the process, but you don't get so obsessed about the results. And Nick Saban calls this the process. And he came out to this where of course they have goals. They want to win the national championship. They want to win the SEC championship. To do that, you got to win 11 games or whatever, right? And you go down and down and down. But in the midst of the game, they don't focus on winning the game. They focused on the next possible down and the down after that, because things are going to happen, right? I had goals for the first and second quarter this year for public speaking income. Well, guess what? I couldn't control the government shutting down the economy, right? And a pandemic sweeping across. So I say centered in that. And I also have come to this notion that you can take away my house, you can take away my cars, you can take away anything I have. I don't care. My wife and my kids are the most important thing. And before this pandemic started, we had actually come to the mindset of our plan was at the end of the year to sell our house and sell just about everything we have and travel Europe for a year.
I love that.
Now, who knows what the heck's going to happen, but we have gratitude for having come to that mindset, because now I interviewed an entrepreneur named John Osborne. He's a VC, and he got into this. He quit his bank job that was unfulfilling and said, you know what? I don't want to do this anymore, and I don't know what I'm going to do, but I'm going to go and vagabond around Europe for a year. And he did that, and he slept on benches. One of the things that helped him was, listen, I know I can survive without money and without a home, without enough money to go into a hotel. I've slept on park benches, and I survived, So it allowed him then to go back, take risks, and now he's one of the top VCs in the Southeast. And when you have that mindset that you're detached because you're like, it's not that you don't care, but it's that you don't care. It's a hard concept, but it's that unattached action that it's not so much about resilience, but it goes back to the third law or second law, whatever it is of thermodynamics, that energy can be neither created nor destroyed. And if you're energy, hey, hit me with a brick, you can't hurt me, can't do anything to me.
I love that. And you're known, Curt, you're known as a bit of the freedom lifestyle guy, the freedom guy. And this is really what you're talking about, though, isn't it? We haven't really, we're 40 minutes into the talk and really haven't discussed much about that freedom lifestyle, or what does freedom mean to you and all of that. That's what you're known for. But I got the sneaky suspicion that all of this is really what you're talking about, though, right? That's what you're getting after when you talk about freedom.
100%. Everything we've talked about. When freedom isn't just about entrepreneurship and quitting your job. I think it's sad that we all think that, right, in our society. Freedom is about everything we've talked about. Freedom is about being able to wake up every morning feeling fulfilled in what you do, in your relationships, in your self-care, in your career. And you get there, it's all about these external circumstances we're talking about. Pandemic or external expectations of mom and dad or teachers or bosses or society or whatever it is. When you have the ability to tune all that out, be completely detached from what other people want you to do, or what you think they want you to do, or what you think is the right path and is practical and responsible. And like you said, it's between your two ears. And if you take the path that you want, regardless of what Trump says or what Pelosi says, or what they're reporting on CNN or on Fox News, or what happened in Italy when you live in the middle of Omaha, then you're truly free. And you become free truly when you're detached from, it's not about caring, it's not about not having empathy, but it's realizing that there are things you can control and there's things you can't control. And by the way, the things you can't control, like exponentially far universally outweigh and far outnumber what you can control.
You bet. That's right. I'm standing up at my podcast desk right now, and I want to open the window and say, I'm discovering my superpowers today. I am just completely inspired by the conversation, because it is interesting when we have conversations like this. A lot of it is stating the obvious, but many people just fail to execute on it, right? They just fail to do. I always say, leadership's a verb. It's the action of doing it. You just have to do it, right? And it's these things that you talk about today that, if you break down, if if you were on this podcast and you were stopping it every minute and would take a note, you could break these things down. That it just seems like it boils down to doing these things really is what gives you this freedom. It allows you that action of being free, of understanding what your superpower is, having that clear vision, listening to the internal you, being truly centered, all of that. You just got to do it.
Absolutely, and it helps in a if you're in a team environment, and certainly if you're a manager, to help empower your teams to do this as well. I was thinking as we were speaking here, you were in the Air Force. Imagine a pilot is given a mission and he's on the way to complete that mission. And it's going to be hairy, right? He's got to focus on a target. There's going to be people shooting back at him, whatever it is. Imagine something happened to that pilot's, say their grandmother died while he was in the air. Is it a good idea or a bad idea to ring in and say, hey, I know you're on your way to this mission and I know people are going to shoot. We just want to let you know that your grandfather died. Right? Compare that to the situation now. Like when it's suddenly controversial, like, hey, I have empathy for what's going on in Italy, but if I sat there every day and focused on the coffins piling up over there, it's sad. There's literally nothing I can do about it from here in Charleston, South Carolina. Or, you're on the way and it's like he's on the way to complete the mission. And you allow in these jets his Facebook feed to be on the dash or on the window or Twitter feed, right? And he starts getting so mad. It's like, can you believe Trump said this or Pelosi said this or whatever it is? Like, of course not. And so
that's right.
That's comparable to your outcomes. Like, if you got to sell a product, if you got to support your family, if you got to build your business, if you got to help your clients, act like you're on a pilot on the way to a mission. It does you no good to worry about this other stuff. Yeah, you'll find out about it, but it's not your duty to know it like right now. And, people could argue that say, well, it would be cruel not to let that pilot know ASAP that, heck, I could apply it to your spouse died, right? I mean, you still wouldn't call the pilot.
That's right.
And there's people who would say, that's mean. No, I mean, when lives are at stake or the mission's at stake, you got to have that vision, focus on your outcomes and let that vision be your guiding star for where you need to go.
Yeah, I love that. It's a fantastic analogy. The fighter pilot analogy, the left-hander trying to throw right-handed, all of those things, so simple of a comment, but yet should hopefully reach all of our souls, because these are the things that just make you a better person. And by being a better person, you will always be a better leader, a better follower, a better mentor, a better coach, a husband, a wife, a brother, a sister, a father. All of those kind of things just make you a better person, because again, it's focusing on those outcomes and it's tangible. You can have real things happening to you by focusing on those right things. Yeah. So Curt, I tell you, I can't say enough how important this conversation has been to me personally, and hopefully to our tribe of listeners out there, that this is some fantastic stuff. I think there's no doubt that everybody in the tribe here would love to pull up on a bar stool at a bar with you somewhere and crack their favorite beverage and just talk to you all day long, because you're that type of motivator for sure. So thanks again for joining us today, because I have 3 pages of notes that we are going to break down even more, because this is just some amazing stuff and I am feeling the flow.
Well, James, I want to thank you, first of all, for those kind thoughts. But part of my mission is coming on shows and having conversations like this to help people and provide value. But also, I'm always honored when people invite me onto their show, and it's been a real pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for joining our leadership movement this week, talking to Curt about unleashing your superpowers, creating a clear vision, defining your life of alignment, becoming radically outcomes focused, and getting into that state of flow we all wish for. Was just amazing. I think you all will agree that was a pretty cool podcast. Don't forget, our show notes are posted on the website with key leader takeaways and suggested action plans.
Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and tell a friend so we can continue to build our tribe. Join our Facebook group to get even more behind-the-scenes action and exclusive content for leaders. Until next time, remember that iron sharpens iron. Make yourself and others around you better every day.